Sports fans, don't miss DraftKings' new Fantasy Draft League. The entry fee is waived with your first deposit, and you can win $30,000. I'm in. Hey sports fans, Coach Nick here. Welcome to B-Ball Breakdown. I am pleased to have Brian Geltzeiler of SiriusXM Radio and 120 Sports now to bring on and talk some NBA news. Brian, how are you doing with all these new outlets for your opinions?
What does the old expression go, Nick? First of all, I'm doing great, thank you. I'm busier than a one-legged man in a butt-kicking contest. But I'm having fun. Season's starting soon, so very exciting, and I'm into it, man. It's all good, you know?
Wow. Well, if you're that one-armed guy hanging in a tree, I'll make sure not to wave to you.
There you go. Please don't do that. I'm definitely the type that waves back.
All right. Well, this is great stuff. Well, speaking of waving, the defenders are waving at a lot of the Warriors on their offensive set. I got to tell you, I watched a whole bunch of their misses in a row, and I was excited just watching that because I haven't seen a team, short of maybe the Spurs, move the ball like the Warriors have been. What are your thoughts overall on how they're looking this year and what their possibilities are at the end of the year?
Well, I'm not looking to bash Mark Jackson here, Nick, but if we're being frank, the fact of the matter is Mark Jackson's offense was flat out unimaginative the last few years. And with the amount of talent that he has on that team, a more free-flowing system that Steve Kerr's put in place here is going to work a lot better. From what we've seen here in the preseason, it works. It's going to work very well. He's got some aspects of the triangle in there, but it's not totally triangle. He's certainly, guys can kind of go and do what they have to do. I like the way Curry has looked a little bit better. I think Klay Thompson's going to have an enormous year for this team. And funny, because even personnel-wise, like I felt as though, and granted, you know, this is what's happened is a little bit unfair to Mark Jackson in this respect. Mark Jackson was totally restricted when they brought him Iguodala last year in who he could bring off the bench. He was pretty much told by ownership, based upon the dollar amounts these guys were making, that Lee's got to start and Iguodala's got to start. Steve Kerr doesn't have the same shackles. So he understands Harrison Barnes being in that starting lineup is going to get the best out of Harrison Barnes. So Barnes is going to start. Iguodala is going to come off the bench. Iguodala will anchor a second unit. And one of the visions they had for Iguodala last year was to be that secondary ball handler for them without Curry in the game and with Curry in the game. Well, now they have Sean Livingston, who's been hurt here in the preseason. He'll be able to give him that aspect. But Iguodala as a secondary ball handler, even a guy that comes out and runs point for a little while, it's going to be much more effective doing that on a second team against the other team's bench players. The whole thing seems to work better. Listen, if I have my way and I was coaching the Warriors, and ownership wasn't shackling me, I'd bring David Lee off the bench and start Barnes at stretch 4 because I think that would be the best look for them. But if that's something that Kirk can't do or doesn't want to do, the next best thing is Iguodala off the bench. So I think when you look at the aspects of the offense that he's changed, the personnel changes he's going to make in the lineup, I think you're going to see a better year for the Warriors. It's very funny, Nick, because when I'm evaluating at all times as you come out of an offseason who I like and who I don't like. And my first gut instinct about the Warriors was that the system changes were going to have them take a step or two back before they take steps forward. I don't believe that anymore. Watching them in the preseason and with the understanding that Oklahoma City's probably not going to be a top 4 team based upon Durant's injury, I look at Dallas and Golden State as being 2 teams that are going to move up and be in higher positions for playoff seeding this year than they were last year.
Wow. Well, you know, having spent time around Mark Jackson a little bit and Steve Kerr a little bit, they couldn't be more different. And I would say that Kerr does have a little bit more of a kind of a less intense feel to him, which probably would help in this situation because it did feel like tense intensity and tense feelings were abound in that locker room last year for a lot of reasons. I don't know, are you well aware of my Harrison Barnes fetish?
No, but you know what? It's funny because that's why you and I are like yin and yang, because I love Harrison Barnes. I've been a Harrison Barnes guy for a while. The versatility, the ability to score, and actually there's a decent NBA defender somewhere in there as well.
Yeah, he can shoot threes, he can defend 4 positions, and he can post up. And my take on it after that first playoffs they had against the Spurs 2 years ago was that he could actually have the potential to be the best player on that team overall because of that. Steph Curry is never going to be the defender that he is, and if he could shoot, 38, 40% from 3 and post up, then that's really effective as well. Klay Thompson is the guy, though. I think his time on Team USA, it might be the cliche, but it really did help him. He's bringing the ball up more. That makes me really excited because I've always said that Steph Curry while fantastic with the ball, off the bounce, with those passes, and with the shooting, I truly feel like he is, if not the best, it's yin and yang for him as far as coming off the screens, off the ball. So it looks like Kerr's understood that and gotten Curry coming off the ball even more. And that's what's making this offense just really supercharged.
Absolutely. Because that's one of the things that, if you remember 2 years ago when they made that playoff run, two things that were very important with that. They beat up Denver in that first round and gave the Spurs a run in the second round. Two things were very important there. Number one, presence of Jarrett Jack. When David Lee went down, they put Jarrett Jack in the starting lineup and moved Barnes to stretch four. Jarrett Jack was able to get Curry off on a wing, and you were able to get Curry going in a lot of spots where he was able to come off the ball to get open. And if you take the ball out of Curry's hands a little bit, you'll get better shooting from Steph Curry. I don't think that's a solution all the time, because I think my personal opinion is that Curry had his best year ever in the league last year as a point guard, even though it was one of his poorest shooting years. Just because as a lead guard, I think Curry developed a lot. But he's too good a weapon to not try to highlight his shooting sometimes. So Jack there was a big deal. Putting Thompson on the ball a little bit, having him bring it up. Iguodala having him bring it up. Now they have Sean Livingston for when he comes back, having him bring it up. I totally agree there. Here's the other thing with Thompson. Thompson, to me, obviously an excellent shooter. There is a potential to be an outstanding scorer in there. This guy could be versatile and dynamic as well. A couple times last year, they played a game against Indiana on the road that they pulled out last year, maybe in February. I'm going off the top of my head. Klay Thompson hit a game-winning shot when they posted him up from about 10 feet, and it hit a little baby 12-foot turnaround. He could be deadly with this stuff, Nick. It's not only about spotting up and draining threes for him. He could be a deadly scorer all over the floor with as athletic as he is, what a good mid-range shooter he is. So the fact that Steve Kerr's thinking outside the box, looking to see where he can get some dynamic production from certain guys, I think it's fantastic. And listen, here's the other thing. They're very deep at four with having Lee and Draymond Green, who's a terrific weapon off the bench. I still would like to see Barnes get some time at stretch four. I think because the thing about Barnes is this, it's not only that he's athletic, he's good, he can score. You're right, can shoot it from three, can post up, can defend four positions. He's also big. I mean, he's also 6'8.5", 2.25" with a chest on him. And you know what? I got no problem with him keeping guys off the glass and playing inside on the defensive end. He's an exciting player. I can see it in your face while we're talking. I get pumped up over Harrison Barnes. So there's so many things Kerr can do here, and I think what you have, you have a situation in Golden State where ownership is trusting Steve Kerr so much more than they trusted Mark Jackson. Fair or not fair, Mark Jackson's focus on religion was a major turnoff to management and ownership in that organization because it isolated some guys. You had guys that were in and there were other guys that were out. Removing that from this organization has been a weight off their shoulders. It's just not going to be a big part of their organizational culture. I'm not saying Mark Jackson was wrong for doing that, and I'm not saying he shouldn't. His faith is important to him. There's no reason he shouldn't be able to preach that where he wants to preach that. Doesn't make it a great fit for the Warriors. Steve Kerr's a much better fit as a head coach. Going to be a very fun team to watch.
Well, I'm just kind of curious. Do you know specifically? We had heard rumors of certain players feeling like they're not getting the same treatment because they weren't as religious, maybe as other players. Do you know who that might have been talking about?
I don't know about not the same treatment. I know guys felt isolated a little bit. One guy I had heard, and I don't have this confirmed, but I will throw one name out there because there's been some documented stuff about, is Andrew Bogut. For Andrew Bogut, a lot of this was a turnoff. Now listen, Mark Jackson wasn't going to not play Andrew Bogut because he wasn't going to church with Mark's group. Because he needs Andrew Bogut very, very badly. He's a very important player in the team. By the same token, it's not a guy you want to feel isolated from the rest of the group either because of how important he is. So I know that's one of the things that drove it, and I think ownership kind of felt the same way that Bogut did. It wasn't, even though it's very important to Jackson, they didn't feel like it was a comfortable part of their organizational culture to have Mark Jackson preaching that stuff in the locker room. And I say that stuff not in a negative, derisive way, but it's not necessarily commonplace for all NBA locker rooms. It was important to Mark. It was a lot less important to ownership there, to Bob Myers, to the Lakeups. They didn't necessarily think that this was something they wanted pervasive within their organization. For the way they run things, Steve Kerr's a much better fit.
Sure. I mean, but let's not ignore the elephant in the room as far as culturally in San Francisco. We know that Mark Jackson's been on the record as being somewhat insensitive to the gay community, and we know that there is that's also important to the culture of the Warriors and in their structure. So I feel like that's a tough situation all around, and probably just a good situation to sort of have a break, bring somebody else in, and have a more harmonious up top to bottom culture.
Most certainly, and I mean there was a lot of issues with Jackson. I mean, let me ask you a question: when have you ever seen a situation where two assistants get jettisoned as late in the year as it happened with Scalabrine and Ehrman? And yes, Scalabrine had his own opinions on how things got done, and Jackson felt like he was usurping Jackson's lead assistant, Pete Myers, in the locker room. And Scalabrine's an analytics guy, and that was not what Mark Jackson was preaching. But the Ehrman thing was just weird. I mean, taping conversations, and when you have an assistant taping conversations, who he was taping it for can absolutely be in question here, but it doesn't exactly the taping of conversations and trust within an organization don't exactly go hand in hand, Nick. So the Warriors, it's a strange thing to fire a coach who had a 50-win season and really didn't have his best big man in the playoffs and gave the Clippers a run anyway. Mark Jackson did a very good job coaching that team. But if it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. And for the Warriors, he didn't fit.
Yeah, and I believe the story was that he kind of summarily dismissed Scalabrine in front of the entire team in a very disrespectful way, and it just seemed, strange all around. Plus, the other thing was he would leave. What I'd also heard was that he would have a practice for a half an hour and then got on a plane down to L.A. to be a pastor often. And so practices weren't happening as much, which could also lead to dysfunction offensively and rhythm, and that might be another reason why they were. I mean, it's hard to fathom a team with those kind of players would only be 13th in the league in offensive efficiency.
Yes, and work ethic wise, there were some questions about his own personal work ethic, but in all fairness, they were also an excellent defensive team. He did a very good job preaching defense with that team. And I say that because I think we have to be fair to Mark Jackson here. He's a very good defensive coach. And the year before they were very good defensively with Mike Malone there, Mark was determined to prove that he could do it himself and Mike wasn't just the brains behind the operation. I thought Mark did that last year. This was a very good defensive team. You're right. They should have been better than 13th in offensive efficiency. And if they were, they had a better chance to advance into the playoffs because of the kind of talent that they have. But nonetheless, he still did a very good job with them defensively. But the thing for the Warriors is this. Curry showed himself to be healthy now 2 years, which is fine. So you don't worry about Curry's health and his ankles as much. Bogut is huge for this team. He is very important for this team. And if Bogut isn't healthy, forget him. They're not going to beat anybody in the playoffs. The West is too tough. They don't have enough depth there. One of the things I had looked at in the offseason that I thought was a very interesting situation is I had thought because of their depth at 4, because of the fact that Green, I think, is a good power forward, even though he's undersized, and I like Barnes as a stretch 4. If I were them, I might have had Indiana on the horn and said, hey, you know what? Can we get Roy Hibbert from you for David Lee? And it might be a deal that Indiana would do. The thought being this, Nick, I know you're making a face. The thought being this, Bogut's not always healthy. The ability to monitor his minutes and play him 28 a game with Hibbert coming in as the 20, you would end up in a situation with a rim protector on the court at all times, all 48 minutes of the game, which is really one thing they need desperately there, and insurance if Bogut went down, where you're certainly deep enough at the 4, and you would have a guy like Hibbert to assume a 35-minute role in there. It was interesting. I know a lot of people like Lee a lot, and maybe talent-wise, there's not really a matchup there, but I kind of felt like in terms of how it would fit the Warriors and help them win in the playoffs, to me, it'd be an interesting deal to pursue. I doubt they'll ever pursue it. I don't think it's something they want to do. It's kind of one of those outside-the-box thoughts that I had that a lot of people don't like very much.
Well, I do feel that Hibbert also has his issues with staying healthy as well. I'm just not a big fan. I mean, I do like his defense, but his offense is so far behind, it's frustrating to the nth degree. But Bogut is the key here without question. And when he is in there, what I said on Twitter the other day was it's simply unfair for the other team. Because when you have him in there and Lee and all the other guys, the passing across 5 players is unprecedented. They're doing touch passes, interior swing. I mean, the ball hasn't moved like that. I don't even know if I've seen the Spurs move the ball like that, like I've seen so far in the preseason from them. So that is definitely a key.